for joining us. I'm Diane Rehm. Last night, President Obama announced his new strategy for Afghanistan. It includes deployment of 30,000 additional troops and a withdrawal date of mid-2011, but at what costs? Joining me to talk about the president's plan, Ambassador Wendy Sherman. She was special advisor to President Clinton. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, U.S. Army, retired, joining us from a studio at Princeton. Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution, and by studio in New York, Ambassador Richard Haas. He's president of the Council on Foreign Relations. We do invite your questions and comments. Do join us on 800-433-8850. Send us your email to drshow@wamu.org. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
And I must say, we had last night three elements within the president's plan that we can talk about. First, the military effort to create the conditions for a transition. Second, a civilian surge that reinforces positive action. And third, an effective partnership with Pakistan. So on that military effort to create the conditions for a transition, Ambassador Richard Haas, what was your reaction?
Well, the real question is whether the Afghans will be able in 18 months, as of the summer of 2011, to essentially take the baton from the United States, which is the date the president said this surge will begin to be unwound. And I would simply say that's one of the big risks in the policy, because history would teach us, Diane, not to be awfully confident about the fact that the Afghans will be willing and able to assume a greater role in their own defense and be able to take up the lion's share of the battle against the Taliban. So much of what the president was saying was not simply a temporary buildup, but implicit or explicit in that was the beginning of a build down, and that is so contingent on a variable that is beyond the control of the United States, namely, again, the capacity of the Afghans.
Let's hear exactly what he had to say.
And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. After 18 months, our troops will begin to come home. These are the resources that we need to seize the initiative while building the Afghan capacity that can allow for a responsible transition of our forces out of Afghanistan.
Ambassador Sherman, what was your reaction?
My reaction is the president did a pretty impressive job with a very, very complex and tough task. I agree with Richard that this is a very, very difficult undertaking. I think the reason for the exit strategy, which is getting so much attention, is because of a couple of reasons. One, he did want to say to President Karzai, we're not there forever. The reforms must take place. There is a sense of urgency. You must do what is required here because we can't transfer the baton without you. Secondly, I think he was making a political point to the American public. As he said, he cares most about building this nation, not some other nation, and he knows that you have to have American support to sustain this kind of effort. He knows that that will not go on forever. Americans are facing very tough economic times. They want to make sure the president doesn't take his eye off of that ball either, which he's not with an economics job summit this week. But thirdly, I know that the military has some concerns that we not let the enemy think that we are just out of there, no uncertain terms. And in fact, Michelle Flournoy, the Undersecretary for Policy of the Defense Department in the New York Times this morning, said that the pace, the duration, and the conditions for beginning that withdrawal will obviously dictate how fast it goes, how long it takes, and that July is really but a beginning, and we don't know how much of a beginning, so we'll have to see.
Colonel Macgregor, I was struck as I watched the president's speech last night with the faces of the young men and women there at West Point. There was not a single smile. It was a very, very serious audience. How do you believe they and others in the military are reacting to the president's plan?
Well, remember, when you talk to the military, normally you talk to the generals and the people that they select to talk to you. And so they provide you with the answer that they want you to hear, which is, we're all very excited, enthusiastic, and ready to go. In truth, it's much more mixed. I spoke recently at West Point, and I would tell you that there are some very sober-minded, intelligent cadets who look at this and question the rationale for the whole thing. I think the biggest problem is that there's a failure to recognize that conditions in Afghanistan have changed from 2001. And what we're doing now is that we're pretending that nothing has changed, that in fact Al-Qaeda represents some dramatic capability in northwest Pakistan poised to re-enter and take over Afghanistan, which is untrue. And we don't understand that the Taliban is the religious leadership of the Pashtun peoples, who number about 45 million. They're rapidly transforming this war against Karzai and his Indian backers, Karzai's narco state effectively, into a war of liberation. And unfortunately, we've placed ourselves in the path of the Pashtun, and we're now widening the war. And for the president, it's very bad because it's going to be a lot tougher in 18 months to disengage from this than it is today.
Michael O'Hanlon, what's your reaction?
Hi, Diane. Well, I was impressed. I thought it was a very well-delivered speech, but more importantly, I thought the president did the good job, the best job he could have realistically of speaking to different audiences in vivid terms that for some people verged on contradictory, because he talked about building up before quickly building down. But I think in the end, the strategy does hold together because, as Michelle Flournoy said, there is going to be no precipitous withdrawal starting in 2011. What the president might have done a little more of, and I think it might have begun to respond to Richard Haas's earlier point, although I'm not claiming it would have totally satisfied the concern, but he could have spelled out a little more about the way in which the partnering concept of General McChrystal really is going to build up these Afghan forces with much more intensive training and mentoring than we've ever had before. And that gives us more grounds for hope than we've had before. So to build on Colonel Macgregor's point, I agree conditions aren't the same as they were in 01, 02, but thankfully the strategy is much different and much more rigorous. And we're going to be able to work really as essentially mentor-apprentice kind of relationships with these Afghan police and army units. That's going to give us a lot more ability to help reform them.
Do you agree with that, Ambassador Sherman? A civilian surge that somehow reinforces positive action?
We already have many more civilians on the ground than we have had in the past, and there is a surge going forward. Again, this is another tough task because we have to help both the Karzai government and, for that matter, the Zardari government in Pakistan deliver something to their people, to know that there is something meaningful that's going to happen in their lives because of this change and because of this strategy. And we have to do it in a way that strengthens Afghans' control of their own country and Pakistan's control of their own country without people perceiving that this is in any way an American imposition. That's always a very difficult task. I think we'll hear a lot more about that from Secretary Clinton today when she testifies with Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen on Capitol Hill, and we'll hear a lot of more details in the days to come.
Let's hear exactly what the president had to say about that last night.
We're in Afghanistan to prevent a cancer from once again spreading through that country. But this same cancer has also taken root in the border region of Pakistan. And that's why we need a strategy that works on both sides of the border.
So, Ambassador Haas, this cancer